The problem is that the system that we have today was designed and built to solve problems of the previous 75 years. So if you look 75 years back, what were the biggest causes of death? Famine, plague. It's been successful, but now the future problems are chronic care and behavioral and mental health. And this healthcare system has no ability to deal with those things, right? And so you need innovation now. They haven't been designed for it. They haven't been incentivized for it. And they're now going to face competition for it.
Welcome to Beyond Theory, a podcast powered by Meadows Behavioral Healthcare that brings you in-depth conversations from the front lines of mental health and addiction recovery. I'm David Condos. As a healthcare entrepreneur and advisor, Marcus Whitney gets to use his own experience with technology and mental health to advance the healthcare field. So what does he think it will take to bring forward-thinking innovation and racial equity to behavioral health? Let's get out of the abstract and see how this applies in the real world. It's time to go beyond theory.
Hey, my name is Marcus Whitney, entrepreneur, healthcare innovator, and investor.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you so much for being with us here at the Mental Health Marketing Conference in Nashville. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we'll start with your story, kind of introduce us to your background. I know you grew up in Brooklyn in the 80s, so kind of could you paint a picture of that for us?
Yeah. So I was born in 1975 and spent my entire childhood in Brooklyn, New York, which was awesome. It's a great place to grow up. You get to meet all different types of people, learn all different types of cultures, which is super cool. And I think it's also just a very ambitious place. And so, you learn a lot about sort of having big goals and working hard. My parents both worked extremely hard, and I was lucky to have a grandmother who was alive until I was about 12 years old. So when I would come home from school, she would, be the one to take care of me because my mom worked in a department store called B. Altman's in Manhattan, and she couldn't get home until 6, 7 p.m. at night. And my dad always worked nights. He was a correction officer for most of my childhood. He was a correctional officer for the city of New York, working in the jail system. So he might be at Rikers Island, at any given night, and he worked nights, and so he slept during the days. So I had a great childhood, man. Grew up on an awesome block in East Nashville, East Flatbush, and did what boys did. Played football, had friends. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Growing up.
And now you're in East Nashville.
Now,
so that's
that's right.
forward.
That was the faux pas there. Now I work in East Nashville, live in Wedgewood, Houston. I've been in Nashville for 19 years. Sort of in between New York and Nashville was a really interesting window of discovery for me. I went to University of Virginia for architecture, ended up dropping out, becoming a hip hop musician, did that for like 4 or 5 years, traveling up and down the Eastern coast, and landed ultimately in Atlanta. And that's when my life sort of really turned up. I met my ex-wife, we started a family, and then about a year after the family started, moved to Nashville in the year 2000. And that's sort of the beginning. When I was here, had one kid, one on the way, no degree, and was waiting tables 6.5 days a week to sort of make ends meet in an efficiency hotel. So that's sort of the beginning of my adult my adult life.
Yeah. And so I know where the focus here is mental health here at this conference today. And so kind of talk us through the journey of mental health. Like, how do you remember being introduced to that? What were your views of that? And maybe how have they changed as you've become more aware of it, kind of gotten to know some people who are into that? Yeah.
So I have no real remembrance of mental health as a child. When I say child, I mean all the way through my teenage years. I would say probably my first real encounters around this entire umbrella, and I won't even call it behavioral health, mental health, but just disorders. The idea of disorders really hit when both of my boys, started to get labeled as ADHD. And we started having to go through that whole world. Now, we're now sort of on the other side of that, and it's not clear whether or not those were appropriate, diagnoses or not. And we certainly didn't go through navigating them with pharmaceuticals. We just, gave them a lot of love and tried to create environments for them that would sort of suit those things. But that was really when I think I started becoming way more aware of it. And then obviously, there was the societal awareness of it. And then for the last 5 years, I've been very involved in healthcare and healthcare innovation. And so it's an everyday thing for me now.
Right. Yeah. And so in other conversations I've had, I know that the topic of mental health among people of color, minority communities has come up. You're talking about lack of access, stigmas, misunderstanding. I guess how do you view that? How have you seen that play out, and how do you think that could be improved?
Yeah, well, I definitely think that there are different cultural realities from a convention perspective that different cultures have, and I think in the African American community, there's a fairly interesting relationship with the healthcare system broadly, right? I think that it is an institution that has not really, in America, has not really served the African American population very well. It has certainly, there are so many instances where instead of, mental health and behavioral health services, we deal with the criminal justice system. And I'm not making like big leaps here. I'm talking about basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that the overall distrust that African Americans have, which is very justified based on, history, extends itself into many of the institutions that this country has, and the healthcare system is one of them, and the behavioral health, mental health community are subsets of that. And so,
yeah, and even if it doesn't go to the criminal justice side, even getting access to care, getting access to quality care, provider bias, when you're in care, I mean, it seems like there's just so many factors at play.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if the people that you see don't understand sort of your cultural context, then there's an issue there, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
And so, is it just education? The healthcare industry needs more education about that, or what's
the reason why I said there's a lot there is because at the foundation of it all is equity, which is not necessarily something that's just about mental health or behavioral health. It's about power, and making sure that in every environment where every person is, there are people there that can be advocates for them, that can anticipate the challenges that they would have and design solutions for them. And so conversation's pretty inadequate. You know what I'm saying? That's fine. But ultimately, you have to have equal representation and equal distribution of power commensurate with the population. And we don't have that in this country. And so there's always going to be a deficit of appropriate care for many people when the power structure doesn't reflect them. And when I say it doesn't reflect them, I mean, it doesn't understand them.
Right.
It can't, I can't understand what a woman needs experientially. I can empathize with it. I can want to understand, but I don't understand.
It's just never going to be at the same level.
I'm never going to know what it's like biologically. So you have to have women in power who understand that at an experiential level to be able to design solutions that women need. There's no difference between that and African Americans or Native Americans or any other demographic group. And so that's why the equity and the power dynamic is so key to actually solving. That's the real fundamental problem.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental problem.
Takes time.
That takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
That's a completely different discussion.
Right. Yeah. And so kind of zooming out, looking even bigger picture, what's one thing that you wish the culture at large, America, understood better about mental health?
Well, I will say, I think we're coming a long way. We're getting much, much better about it. Understanding that mental health is just health. right? Understanding the brain, understanding emotions, understanding chemicals, understanding hormones, and understanding that there's no quote unquote right way for a human being to exist. We're coming a long way, and understanding our relationships with chemical dependency and self-medication. We're coming a long way in all of these different aspects. I think, unfortunately, it takes some disasters in order to drive that. The opioid situation is bringing in awareness to that unfortunately other previous chemical dependency disasters that didn't affect white people
didn't break through to that level of consciousness.
When I was growing up in New York, man, crack was crazy, and it was seen as a drug problem. And now opioids are really driving this conversation about mental health in a different way, right? So, I think that it's coming a long way. It's coming a long way. I made a choice 11 months ago to stop drinking for health reasons. It's been awesome, and that along with exercise is put me in a position to be able to start meditating daily and to be able to change my diet and be able to focus on sleep. And I just sort of see all these things as being connected, right? I think it is important to focus on mental health, but I think there's massive connectivity between mental health and physical health and environmental health,
and community connection,
and occupational well-being, and this stuff is so connected. It's so connected, and I think we don't have an integrated health care system, and so we have mental health and behavioral health over here, and we have acute care over here, and surgical over here, and nutrition over here, and they're not coordinated, and they don't look at the whole person, and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate because what ends up filling the gaps is pharmaceuticals in a lot of cases. And the pharmaceutical industry has been fantastic. Without the pharmaceutical industry, we wouldn't have been able to mass produce penicillin, and we've done so many incredible things through pharmaceutical, but it's every single tool can be overused or inappropriately used, and I think because of the design of the healthcare system, we've plugged gaps with drugs
because it's an easy answer.
Correct. In places where we really should be bringing in other modalities and more coordination around the care of a human being.
Yeah. All right. So let's shift to looking at some of the work you've been doing in the healthcare space. Mm-hmm. So about 10 years ago, you made the jump in with Jumpstart Foundry, which specifically works with startup companies in healthcare. Kind of what led to you making that jump, and kind of why healthcare?
Yeah. So I said in 2000 I was waiting tables and trying to take care of a small and growing family, living in a week-to-week hotel. And the way I got out of that was by teaching myself how to code. And so I started in 2001, my basically, let's call it 10-year career as a technologist. So I went from junior developer to a chief technology officer / entrepreneur over the course of 10 years. And around 2008, I met my partner, Vic Gatto, who's a venture capitalist. 2009, he and I and a group of other folks started Jumpstart Foundry. And it actually didn't start with a focus on healthcare. It was just broadly early stage companies, usually with a technology lens on it. And we did that from 2009 to 2014, invested in, let's call it 45 companies. Of those 45 companies, 20% of them were healthcare companies, and they far outperformed the other 80% in terms of money raised, in terms of survivability, in terms of jobs created. We realized a lot of that had to do with the fact that Nashville is a healthcare town. And so we had this incredible wealth of assets here in terms of human capital, investors who understood the healthcare business. They could follow on and invest in those companies.
That's a good point. Right? Once the ecosystem is in place, it's easier. Yeah.
So in 2015, we made the move to make Jumpstart exclusively a health and wellness based venture business, and we're now the most active investor in the country in healthcare companies. We invest in a little over 20 a year. And then we also created Health Further in 2015, which started as an event around healthcare innovation and grew from 650 attendees to just shy of 2,000 last year. And last year, we made the decision to turn off the event and turn on a strategic advisory business. And so we built quite a network. We learned a lot about the state of healthcare across the country and where it was all going. And we also felt like the starter pistol had kind of been fired on the next version of the healthcare business with changes that was happening in Washington, D.C., along with changes happening in the free market that everyone sort of is seeing now. Those changes are lots of public companies in healthcare were going private. There were big consolidations like CVS and Aetna. And then you had really, really big consumer companies coming into the healthcare space. That's Walmart, that's Amazon, that's Apple, that's Google. And so all that stuff basically came to a head last year. And we were like, events are cool, but we could be a lot more effective if we were more nimble and more agile. And so we've been operating like that for the last year and to good success.
I like what you said about the starter pistol going off for this new wave, this new generation of healthcare. What kind of, I know you talked about some of the big companies coming in, different things happening in Washington. How do you view that? Like what will that new health market look like in your view?
Well, behavioral health is a big part of it. There's a growing recognition that many of the issues we've been trying to solve with either just drugs or the criminal justice system or not solving it all, and then having downstream physical health ramifications are really behavioral health issues and can be dealt with therapy or community engagement
on the front end.
On the front end, that's right. And so, you're seeing more and more opportunities just in reimbursable dollars coming up in behavioral health, and when reimbursable dollars show up, that's when the acute care system starts to say, okay, there's opportunity here. So I think that's one big thing. I think large self-insured employers are also a really interesting area. They are really the customer of healthcare in this country. Like, if you think about it, we have a generally speaking pretty low unemployment rate in the country right now. And people, when they think about the jobs that they take, it's not just about salary, it's also about benefits. And so we've worked our way into a system where, as an employer, part of how you compensate people is through health insurance. It's part of the package, and they buy these packages en masse. And so when you really think about who is the actual customer in this country for healthcare, largely the free market customer is large employers. And the largest of those are the self-insured employers, where they're taking on all the risk, right? It's like they're the backstop for everything. And I think you're going to see a lot of innovation coming out of large self-insured employers. So when we talked about Walmart, we talked about Amazon, they're large consumer players, but really what's motivating them is their employee base. They have a growing employee base. They're spending a lot of money on the healthcare for that employee base, and they know they're not getting their money's worth. Right, the employee satisfaction is low. The missed days from work, right? So there's real sort of labor implications here for not having good healthcare opportunities. And I think we're going to see a lot of activism and a lot of new market solutions coming from the self-insured employer market.
So you think those companies like Walmart or whoever will drive some of that?
Yeah. When you look at what Amazon launched first, you can go to Amazon.care and go to the website. It's a solution for their employees. Right. The things they're doing are starting with their employees, and then they're going to roll these things out to the greater market. And also, I think they're going to offer them to other large employers to compete with, the existing brokers. So I think it's going to be a really interesting new world. And these consumer-oriented companies, they're great because they've been living on the mobile phone for the last 5 to 10 years, and so
they're not afraid of the innovation.
No, they lean into it. Innovation is their oxygen, in fact, right? And so I think that's what's so cool, and why I use the starter pistol analogy for the last 12 months.
Yeah, and they have the experience and the capital to make something happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the desire. Right. I mean, I think the other thing that people need to understand is that healthcare is 18% of GDP and growing. It's the largest segment of the gross domestic product. So it's a massive market opportunity. And these are publicly traded companies. So their fiduciary duty is to find new market opportunities and capture market share. Healthcare is the big untapped market. They've ravaged the advertising market. They're ravaging the retail market, right? What markets can they go after next? healthcare. It's massive.
Yeah, and so kind of you brought up about how a company like Amazon getting into this is not afraid of the innovation.
At all.
So something that I've heard in other conversations is that the healthcare industry historically has been more afraid of that innovation. They've been kind of lagging behind. I guess why do you think that is, and what's it gonna take to get them up to speed? Is it gonna be things like this, shift like this?
So they are that way for very good reason, right? So it's basic economics, it's incentives. So the healthcare systems, people don't really think about them this way. We don't give healthcare systems enough kind of credit. Healthcare systems are high reliability systems, right? Which means the enemy is variability. Okay. And the stakes are really, really high. Right. They're not that high in consumer stuff. Like if a package doesn't get delivered or gets botched or something, you're mad about it, but it's not like life or death, and you can't get a malpractice suit as a result of it, right? And so, the healthcare industry has optimized for high reliability, and they're significantly penalized when they have variability in their systems. So when you think about what kind of organization would you build for high reliability, it's not going to be an innovative organization. It's going to be a highly effective operational organization. And so they just don't have that DNA in place, and they haven't been incentivized to do that. The problem is that the system that we have today was designed and built to solve problems of the previous 75 years, right? So if you look 75 years back, what were the biggest causes of death? Famine, plague, you know what I mean? Like it was a completely different world, like disease. And when I say disease, I don't mean cancer. Cancer is proving to be very difficult. But I'm talking about like the measles. Polio, right? You know what I mean? Stuff that like we've virtually eradicated, right? I mean, polio's almost gone, almost entirely gone. And so those are massive successes of this healthcare system. Life expectancy has gone up, more than a decade. That's a massive benefit of that. That's a massive benefit of this healthcare system. And so, I think you have to look at that and say, it's been successful, but now the future problems are chronic care and behavioral and mental health. And this healthcare system has no ability to deal with those things, right? And so you almost need innovation now. They haven't been designed for it. They haven't been incentivized for it. And they're now going to face competition for it. And that's a really tough position to be in. Those market forces are exactly why we stopped throwing events and we started rolling up our sleeves and working with systems, because they actually need help. And quite frankly, in America, we don't really want them to go under. Like, we want to put pressure on them to change and improve, but we don't want our healthcare infrastructure to go under, because there's lots of implications for that are not good.
Yeah. But now they're going to have to face that.
There's no question they have to face it now. Yeah, for sure.
So just something else for a listener who might want to dive in even deeper on this, mental health, innovation in healthcare. What would be a book or a resource that you'd recommend for them?
Actually, there's a book called Mind Hacking Happiness. I did the audiobook version of it. It's kind of hokey, but it's also like right.
Is it?
It's also right.
It's practical.
Yeah, it's pretty practical. It's pretty practical. I do think mindset plays a really, really big role in the opportunity for you to have good mental health. And that for me has been a really, really big shift. My ability to process these things and remain happy has largely come from my recognition that I'm observing things. I'm even observing things that I'm personally experiencing, and being able to put a little bit of a buffer between the emotions I'm feeling and myself, and be able to give those emotions space to occur and not necessarily respond to them, but to also respect them, and try to understand what they're trying to tell me. Those are things that this book, and there's a lot of other books like this. The Untethered Soul is another one. But I do think we have to do some amount of work on our own. We can't completely rely on external support for our well-being. We have to kind of do things on our own, And those are a couple of books. They both have very similar messages, but one's like much more the spiritual minded. The other one's kind of hokey and silly. Mind Hacking Happiness is kind of hokey and silly. But those are two books that have been helpful for me.
Absolutely, yeah. And so just to wrap up with this last question, what would be a favorite piece of advice, something that's meant a lot to you that you'd like to leave listeners with?
3 words: mood follows action. That's been really, really helpful for me, because I feel like when you're in a bad mood, one of the most difficult things to do is to take the action to get out of the bad mood. And people who don't necessarily understand that mood follows action will be waiting for their mood to change before they can take action. And you have to find the strength and the courage and the bravery to like take the action in spite of the mood that you're in, because your mood is not the leading indicator; it's the trailing indicator of your actions and your activities. And so when you're in a funky place, one of the most important things you can do is take an action. Like if you're feeling down, go exercise. You know what I'm saying? There's so many chemicals that we're learning about every day that are playing a role in the moods that we have, and it's like sometimes you just need some exercise, sometimes you just need water, sometimes you just need to get some sleep, but a lot of times there's a physical and physiological action to take to impact your mood in a positive way. Maybe you're hungry and you just need to like go eat something, so mood follows action has been really helpful for me. It's been empowering for me to not feel under the weight of my moods and feel like I need to kind of reach for some external thing like, alcohol or something like that. And to kind of say, no, I have the things within me that I need to at least improve this scenario. What are those things? And get better at trying to build a practice around those actions so that I can maintain the kind of mood that I want for the long term.
Marcus Whitney is the co-founder and co-owner of healthcare advisory firm Health Further, healthcare investment firm Jumpstart Foundry, and Major League Soccer team Nashville SC. Check out his podcast, Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe, and see what else he's up to at marcuswhitney.com. Beyond Theory is produced, written, and edited by me, David Condos. You can discover more from this podcast, including extended videos of each conversation at beyondtheorypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Beyond Theory.